These are the drawbacks. Okay. Now, I will come to next technique, which is called laser Doppler velocimetry. Very quickly I will tell you. So, LDV, this is the experimental setup, looks complicated, I will try to explain this to you. So, basically in LDV laser Doppler velocimetry, you have a laser light source, you have a light separation optics, light transmitting optics, light collecting optics, photo detectors, signal processing electronics, external data input devices, computer, software, traversing system and seed particles. So, here you see, using the LDV also you are interested in measurement of spray. Okay. So, here is the chamber, okay, and here is the injector. So, you are basically injecting the fuel spray and here is the exhaust duct. So that if you have done one injection, the droplets should not just fly around, they should be sucked out, so that for the next injection it is all clear, the droplets from previous injection are not flying around. So, that is why the exhaust duct is put. Okay. There is a strobe light, you know stroboscope, you must have used in the school days, stroboscope. So, there is a strobe light, basically it is just to illuminate the spray. There is a fuel tank here, and this fuel tank contains the fuel, diesel or gasoline, whatever spray you are interested. This is the supply pump. So, basically the fuel pressure needs to be increased. If you are dealing with a common rail system, this pressure could be as high as 1600, 1800 bar. So, you need to increase the pressure. So, this is the pressurization system. So, this is the pump, it is connected to a motor, and then here is the common rail, and then common rail is connected to the injector. Okay. So, this is the fuel supply part, and this is EDU, electronic diesel unit. This is like ECU, electronic control unit for a diesel engine. Okay. And there is a pulse generator here. So, this is connected to EDU, and this EDU is controlling the pressure, it is controlling the common rail, it is controlling the injector. So, basically this system is nothing but fuel injection system. So, now if I give a signal, then it will, pressure is already generated, this high pressure fuel is stored in the rail, it is connected. As soon as we give the signal, it will give order to the injector solenoid to open for a short period, and as soon as it is opened, the fuel will be injected in the chamber at a high pressure. Okay. So, this is the fuel system and the fuel control system. Okay. Now, we come to the lighting arrangement. So, there is a PC computer to operate the processor, there is a signal processor here, and then there is a this is the signal processor, there is a light source. Okay. Light source basically is a laser, and then there is a XY traverse. This is the LDV probe. So, basically in LDV probe what happens is that there is a light source which is laser separately, and then the laser is taken through fibers to LDV probe, and in LDV probe you have the optics to do all the LDV is a measurement technique which is quite similar to PDI. So, here also all the splitting and other thing, beam splitting etc. is done. Okay. So, LDV probe, two converging beams emerge, and you focus the focal point in the spray point of measurement, and then here you have with a high speed camera on the other side to look at to capture the spray, and then PC to operate the camera. So, this is how the LDV system actually works. Okay. If you are interested in doing the measurements inside a spray bomb, this is the experimental setup. If you are interested in doing the measurements inside an optical engine, then you can replace this bomb with the optical part of the engine. You can just put an optical engine in between. Okay. So, LDV, it's a single point measurement because two beams are merging. Wherever they merge, that's the point where you do the measurement. It offers flexibility. Okay. So, basically you do not have to worry about alignment of lasers, you do not have to worry about in PDI system, it is very important that all 6 beams should merge at one point. That is what makes it challenging to actually adjust the beams and bring it to a small point which is 100 micron diameter. And every time you change the experimental setup, you have to do this exercise again. If you are a skilled person, you will be able to do it in a day. If you are not an unskilled person, it could take you somewhere between 1 week to 1 month, okay, just to align the 6 beams at a small point. It is a very, very challenging task. LDV, it's all taken care of. It's all factory aligned. It comes as a probe. You just take that probe. You want to measure the droplets floating around in this room, or maybe the particles floating around in this room. You can do that. Okay. It works on air or water. As micron sized particles entered in the fluid pass through the intersection of the 2 laser beams, the scattered light received from the particle fluctuates in intensity. Okay. The frequency of this fluctuation is equivalent to the Doppler shift between the incident and scattered light, and this is proportional to the component of particle velocity. The velocity direction can be fixed if one of the laser beams has a frequency slightly different from the other. The frequency is measured using digital computers and photon correlators and spectral analyzers. What are the applications? It is used for measurement of rotor tip vortices using 3 component laser Doppler velocimetry. LDV measurements in a boundary layer. So, you can do measurements in a boundary layer which are extremely difficult by any other technique, okay. Fluid boundary layer, fluid flow boundary layer. Survey in a wake field. Wake field measurements are also extremely difficult for any fluid mechanicians. Measurements inside a shock tube flow. So, even that is possible. Shock tube flow measurements are also possible using LDV. And then diesel spray breakup length or diesel spray measurements basically are also very difficult. Okay. So, because these are dense sprays, so that also can be tackled by LDV. Diesel spray characteristics by laser Doppler signals. So, spray tip penetration and spray breakup lengths are simply obtained by measuring the delay time of the Doppler signal from the injection start to spray tip arrival at each measuring point. Spray breakup length is estimated by measuring the standard deviation of the time delay of the Doppler signal, which indicates dispersion of the time from the injection start to Doppler signal rising. Okay. Now, let us compare different methods for flow measurements. One is the LDV. Here you can see this is the LDV. So, beams are coming and merging at one point. This is the thermal anemometry. So, you have these wires, hot wire anemometry. Invasive methods, this is going to disturb the flow because you have to have a hot wires inside. So, invasive method for measuring 1, 2 or 3 components of velocity using heated wire or film sensors. This is non-invasive because just the light is going into the cross section. So, it is non-invasive method of measuring 1, 2 or 3 components of velocity using laser technique. PIV, it is also non-invasive, I already discussed with you. Non-invasive method of measuring 2 or 3 component, 1 component is not possible, whereas 1 component is possible with LDV. Okay. So, here only 2 or 3 components in a plane using a double pulse laser, and then particle diagnostics. This is PDI, etc. So, this is also non-invasive method of measuring particle droplets or bubble size using laser techniques. So, this is the comparison of 4 different techniques: exhaust gas emission analysis, which is so important for vehicle or transport industry. Transport industry today is driven by 2 major pushes. One is the fuel economy, okay, because fuel economy is important because you want to burn less and less amount of fuel, so that you put in less and less amount of greenhouse gases into the environment. Okay. The second important driving force for developments in automotive industry is emissions. More and more stringent norms are being adopted worldwide. They are getting more and more stringent with every passing day. Meeting those norms is getting extremely difficult for the automotive industry. They have to be on their toes and keep developing newer and newer technologies, trying to understand the fundamentals of combustion. till Euro 3 or Euro 4, it was very easy for the automotive industry because they could tweak something here and there, and they could match the numbers that were prescribed by the legislative agencies. But now beyond Euro 4 and Euro 5, it will be very difficult to match the numbers just by tweaking. They will require to do, first they will require to understand the combustion much better, and then the second thing is that they have to extensively use exhaust gas after treatment in order to meet the emission regulations. But before we discuss about those things, it becomes extremely important for us to understand how we measure the concentration, how we measure the emissions. What are the emissions which are important? Okay. So, these are some of the fundamental things, how the emissions are measurement, that I am going to cover in this particular lecture. So, exhaust gas basically, or the flue gas, is emitted as a result of the combustion of fuels, and the fuels could be natural gas, gasoline, petrol, or gasoline or petrol, or biodiesel or diesel, or fuel oil or coal. It could be anything, depending on what is the application. So, combustion of all these fossil fuels actually leads to emission of exhaust gas or flue gas, okay? Not just for transport application, but for example, coal. Now, coal is burnt in power plants, so that also leads to the exhaust gas or flue gas, okay? So, this is not just specific to engines, but for any combustion application. So, according to the type of the engine, it is discharged into the atmosphere through the exhaust pipe, flue gas stack or propelling nozzle. So, basically if it is engine, then it is exhaust pipe. If it is power plant, then it is flue gas stack, and if it is aircraft, then it is propelling nozzle. And you can see this exhaust coming out. You do not want to be standing very close to this end of the vehicle, because then it is going to give you lot of problems, headache, and black particle deposition on your face, and in long term you may have lot of health issues. So, the major component of the vehicle emissions also include not just from the tailpipe, but vehicle emissions are also emitted by crankcase blow by and by evaporation of fuel. Okay. So, you see for example, I have a car. If I go for filling the gas tank, so when I am going to the gas station, do you think the tank which I am going to fill with liquid fuel is empty? The answer is no. It is filled with vapor fuel, vaporized fuel. So, when I put the gas into the car, all those vapors will be pushed out because of the density difference. They go out into the environment without any combustion. So, basically you are putting lot of vapor gases, hydrocarbon vapors into the environment, and they cause all these effects. Just to give you an estimate, if you are filling 50 liters of petrol in a car, you are putting 2 grams of gasoline vapors, which is very, very substantial into the environment. So, this is also becoming one of the causes of concern. And then blow by. What is blow by? Blow by gas, you see in the engine, in any engine, if you look at the piston rings have something called end gap. Okay. Rings have crack at the end. When you put it in, there is still a 0.5 to 0.75 millimeter gap, and you do not want that gap to be 0, by the way, because the moment that gap closes, it is called ring collapse, and that is extremely bad for the engine, because then this dynamic sealing between the upper chamber and lower chamber will be gone. That creates a lot of problems. So, you really want that gap, but then you have these 3 rings, and what happens? It is moving up and down between a chamber which is having 100 bar pressure to 1 bar pressure. So, through this gap, lot of gas finds its way from the top chamber to the bottom chamber. This is what is called blow by. Okay. Now, combustion chamber, the top part is designed to withstand very high pressure, but the bottom part is not. In fact, bottom part is not even totally sealed. I mean, if you remember, every engine has a dipstick. What is that dipstick? It is used for seeing the level of the lubricating oil. Do you think it is very, very tightly packed and no gas can come out from there? The answer is just very loosely put there. So, lot of exhaust gas can come from there. There could be other places in the engine crankcase which may be where this pressure will start coming out. So, the exhaust gases that come into the bottom chamber, they increase the pressure in the crankcase, and that starts slowly coming out of the crankcase, because it is not designed to withstand pressure. Now, when you are doing measurements, mostly people think that this is the only place where the emissions are coming out, but that is not true. Lot of emissions come out from blow by. Now, question is, how do you measure? So, how do you measure crankcase blow by? It is extremely difficult, because there is no one spot from where they are coming. So, then their measurement is very specialized thing. So, what is done is, normally you enclose a test cell and you take the exhaust out, and then you do the measurements, you see how the concentration is changing in that test cell. You make sure that it is sealed, okay, and then you see how the concentration is changing. That concentration will change because of the exhaust crankcase blow by. So, there are specialized methods to actually do the measurement of crankcase blow by. Only 1 or 2 places in the country such measurements can be done, and this is more like development tool, okay, that is why we do not have it. Unused gasoline, this is also one area where lot of fuel is put into the environment. So, it is therefore important to measure the emission concentration to test the engine's performance and to make sure that they meet the prevailing emission regulations. So, when you say emission legislations or emission regulations, legislation mean what? Legislation means law of the land, law. Now, who makes this law? Every country has this law, every country has certain emission legislations. So, the emission regulation agencies of that country make those laws. Now, which is the agency in India which makes these laws? It is called Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB. CPCB is the agency which makes the law for emission of different species. Okay. Now, when you say emission legislations, what are the emissions that we are interested in measuring and controlling? So, when you say emission legislations, you have legislations only for 4 species from the engines. One is the carbon monoxide, hydrocarbon, oxides of NOx, oxides of nitrogen, and particulate matter. These are the 4 species only that are prescribed by the law, that you should not emit more than this many grams per kilowatt hour or per kilometer of vehicle travel. Okay. So, these are the regulated emission species. Other than this, everything is unregulated, whether it is SOx. Okay. So, the automotive engine guys say, okay, why it is unregulated? They will say, okay guys, I cannot control it. If your fuel has sulfur, my engine is going to make sulfur dioxide. It's not, if your fuel does not have sulfur, I am not going to produce SO2, and it's very simple, and that's why the SO2 is kept out of emission regulations. Rather, so therefore, the sulfur regulations are put in fuel quality issues. So, fuel quality, there are fuel specifications for every Euro norm, and there the sulfur limits are put, that okay, you cannot have more than 150 ppm or 50 ppm or 10 ppm in some countries. So, if the fuel does not have sulfur, it will not produce sulfur dioxide. Right now, there is no limit on CO2. Even the CO2 is not put in the emission regulations. Why? The reason is that today, as on today, you want all the fuel that you are putting in to get converted into CO2. You do not want CO, you do not want SC, you do not want PM. Everything should be converted into CO2. CO2 is the least harmful species, and right now there are no regulations, but it does not mean CO2 is also a GHG, greenhouse gas, right. So, now what is done is that, you know, I have a friend in Austria, I won't name it, he has a big company related to engine instruments in Europe, and he has a car which has a V8 engine and it's 560 horsepower, and he comes to his office and 560 horses are pulling one person, right. It's atrocious, just he can afford it, and that car meets all the possible emission regulations, but its mileage will be like 4 kilometers per liter, right, or 3 kilometers per liter or 5 kilometers per liter. That is the kind of average that it gives. So, that means he is putting lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. He is not putting too much of this, but lot of CO2. So, that means if somebody has wealth, if somebody is wealthy, what he will do? He will like to buy more horses to pull him, right? Bigger and bigger cars, just because he can afford. And when all the emission regulation calculations are done, it's called grams per kilowatt hour. It does not say that this, you cannot have more than this many kilowatts per passenger. Okay. So, if I can buy a car which is, if I can buy a locomotive 4000 horsepower, I can afford it, yeah, why not? I can still meet the regulations. So, then this came to the notice of the emission agencies, and they said that this is not done. I mean, why are you unnecessarily overpowering your cars? Indian cars are generally underpowered. Okay. So, it is no problem, but many of the people tend to buy Humvees and things like that. You must have seen all big people buying big cars, so which is not so environment friendly. So, keeping this in mind, this segment of the people, the emission regulation agencies said that, okay guys, from Euro 6 onwards, you cannot emit more than 140 grams per kilometer of CO2 into the atmosphere. They did not say that you reduce the power of your car. They said this is the CO2 limit. While maintaining these limits, if you want to have 1000 horses, I have no problem, but those 1000 horses should not emit more than 140 grams per kilometer, not kilowatt hour. So, you should travel 1 kilometer and you should emit still less than 140. And in consecutive emission legislation, this number is going to be tightened. So, 140 to 120, then eventually it will be less than 100. Okay. So, now these people, these friends are now forced to look for technologies which will, if they want to enjoy that kind of same horsepower, they are forced to look for technologies such as hybrids, which emit much less CO2 into the environment. So, if you want power, you go for more expensive technologies, but you do not pollute the environment. So, governments and emission legislation agencies can find their way to control such kind of aberrations. Anyway, so there are many regulations which are not in this list and which are of significant human health concern, and these are all called unregulated gas emissions. I told you formaldehyde is one of these species, SO2, CO2 we have already discussed, methane is another species which is there is no regulation, although methane is a part of hydrocarbons, benzenes, aldehydes, and this list is almost infinite. Okay, so we are not measuring them, we are not regulating them. Reason is that first the measurement is very difficult, okay, and then right now SO2 is a responsibility of fuel producers, CO2 the regulations are going to come in future, and these are species which are emitted in very small concentrations, and their measurements are also not that easy. So, anything which is not in this list of 4 is right now unregulated. Okay. So, there are different methods that are used for different gases present in the exhaust gas. So, the commonly used methods for measurement of CO and CO2 is called NDIR, non-dispersive infrared measurement. NDIR technique is a very standard technique used for CO and CO2 measurement. Then for hydrocarbon measurements, you have something called FID, flame ionization detectors, and for NOx measurement, you have something called chemiluminescence detector, chemiluminescence. Okay. And then for smoke measurements or particulate smoke measurements, you have smoke opacimeter, and then particulate measurement, you have partial flow or full flow measurement systems. Okay. Partial flow and full flow measurement systems I will discuss in detail, but what it really means is that you have an engine coming out, you take a stream of the exhaust, dilute it, and then capture the particles on a filter paper, and then weigh that filter paper. And you know how much power is being produced, so you can figure out how many milligrams per kilowatt hour particulates you are generating. So, that is the partial flow, because you are diluting only a part of the small part of the exhaust, that is the partial flow. If you take the entire exhaust and fully dilute it and then take a fraction out of it and do the measurement of the particulate, that is called full flow dilution system. Okay. And their costs are also very, very different. This one is a cheaper system. So, therefore, the labs like ours can afford it, and this one is more like very expensive system costing in excess of $2 million per system. So, this is only afforded by OEMs who have to meet the emission regulations. Okay. So, first let us discuss about non-dispersive infrared measurement technique or NDIR spectroscopic technique. So, I think I will skip this figure, it is more complicated, I will show you a simple figure. Yeah. So, basically you see there is a IR source here, and then there is a something called chopper. So, you basically bring the IR beam and there is a chopper, and there is a gas sample coming in and gas sample going out. Suppose you are interested in measuring carbon monoxide, and then there is a reference signal here, reference gas. Okay. So, what happens is that in the reference gas you have a gas composition which is very similar to the exhaust gas minus the carbon monoxide. So, that means there will be no carbon monoxide here. In the sample gas there is carbon monoxide, it is passing. So, beam of the same intensity passes through the sample as well as from the reference signal. Now, when the beam is passing through this reference signal, sample signal, the wavelength will be absorbed, wavelength characteristic to carbon monoxide will be absorbed here, and it will not be absorbed here because there is no carbon monoxide. Then it is focused through a lens to a detector. Detector is nothing but basically it is a cell which is divided into half by a thin diaphragm, and it has only carbon monoxide on both sides. Okay. So, now here the wavelength characteristic of carbon monoxide is not absorbed at all, here some of it is absorbed. So, that wavelength, the energy going in from this direction will be higher, the energy going from in this direction will be less. This is absorbed by the one side of the detector, the other one is absorbed from the other side of the detector. So, one side of the detector the pressure will increase, right, because there is more energy, and this side since some of the energy is already absorbed by the sampling gas, here the energy will be less and the pressure will therefore be less. So, there will be a differential pressure created across the diaphragm. There is a diaphragm in the middle, one side the pressure is higher, the other side the pressure is lower. So, what will happen? Diaphragm is a very soft diaphragm which can move depending on the pressure. So, now this diaphragm will get twisted to one side, and there is a device which can measure the movement of this diaphragm, capacitance probe, that will give you voltage output. More is the deformation of the diaphragm, higher will be the capacitance signal, higher will be the voltage signal. Okay. So, if there is less CO passing through this sample, then what will happen? The difference will be less here in the detector. If there is more CO, then this will be very high energy and this will be very less energy, and the difference will be more. So, that is how you measure the carbon monoxide emissions. Is it clear? So, this is how we measure the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. I will try to explain this to you. Every particular, in the IR range between 2.5 micron to 4 micron, these species have, every species have a particular wavelength absorption region. For example, this is the wavelength region for methane, this is the wavelength region for carbon dioxide, this is the wavelength region for carbon monoxide, this is for water vapor, this is for something else. Okay. So, the wavelengths that are between 4.2 to 4.3 are characteristic to CO2. Between say 4.5 to 4.9, this is characteristic to carbon monoxide, and these are not overlapping, these are very distinct wavelengths. Okay. So, here there is a motor, there is a rotary sector, and there is a IR source, light source, single light source, and this is the distribution cell. Half of it is going this side, half of this is going this side. Here you have the reference cell where there is no carbon monoxide species of interest, basically carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide, and here this is the sample cells. Through the sample cell the exhaust gas is flowing, and this is the detector signal. Okay. So, this is the arrangement of mirrors. I do not think you have to really go through the arrangement of mirror, etc. So, a NDIR sensor is a simple spectroscopic sensor often used as a gas detector. It is a non-dispersive in the sense of optical dispersion, since the infrared energy is allowed to pass through the atmospheric sampling chamber without deformation. Okay. The main components of the NDIR sensor are infrared lamp, which should emit infrared rays between 2.5 to 5 micron, a sample chamber, or which is also called a light tube, a light filter, an infrared detector. So, the IR light is directed through the sample chamber towards the detector, and in parallel there is another chamber enclosed with reference gas, typically nitrogen. So, there is no carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide in it. The gas in the sample chamber causes absorption of specific wavelength according to Beer-Lombard's law, and the attenuation of these wavelengths is measured by the detector to determine the gas concentration. The detector has optical filter in front of it that eliminates all the lights except the wavelength that are for the selected gas molecules can absorb. So, either you can have a filter which allows only that particular wavelength to pass, or you can have reference gas as nitrogen. Okay. So, what I said earlier is also correct, or you can have reference signal for all the gases except the species of interest. In that case, you do not need filters. If you are using reference gas as nitrogen, then you have to put a optical filter which allows only the frequencies characteristic to the species of interest. Does it make sense? Okay. So, it is used for measurement of CO and CO2. So, IR radiations of characteristic absorption spectrum are absorbed by these gases, and this is Beer-Lombard's law. Tau is exponential of RAL. R is the gas density, A is the absorptivity, L is the path length, how much the light is traveling. So, here you see this particular wavelength shows the absorption here, and this is the wavelength between say 3.5 to 5 micron. This is the peak for CO transmission. This is the CO2 transmission. So, you can see that these two peaks are almost exclusively separated. Okay. So, CO2 transmission, most of the CO2 is absorbed at 4.3, 4.4. This is the CO2 detector sensitivity. It is very sensitive. It is exactly inverse of this signal versus this signal. This is for carbon monoxide. So, carbon monoxide mostly is absorbed around 4.6 or so, 4.6. So, when the light passes, this will be absorbed. If it is absorbed around 4.2, 4.3, it is for CO2. It is characteristic of CO2. If it is around 4.6, then it is characteristic of CO. So, this is the transmittance spectra from CO and CO2. So, I think I will skip this part. So, working, the sample cells and the detector cells are filled with a gas to be measured. Reference cell are filled with air or exhaust gas minus the species of interest. IR radiations are absorbed in the sample cells, and therefore, the less IR is detected by the detector cell. This leads to differential pressure in the detector cells. Differential pressure is measured, and this is related to gas concentration. So, basically you have to perform the calibration also. So, what you do is you basically take different known concentration of carbon monoxide. Suppose I know that I have a gas cylinder which has 5% carbon monoxide. I pass it through the sample cell, and once I pass it through the sample cell, I get some differential pressure. Then I take another sample 10%, it gives me another differential pressure 15%, 20%, and then I can basically make a calibration curve that this is my known concentration and this is my differential pressure. And then I put my unknown sample, and when I put unknown sample, it gives certain differential pressure. So then I go back to this calibration curve, and using this calibration curve I can figure out that this is my concentration in the exhaust. Okay. So the movement of the diaphragm is calibrated by passing the gases of known composition through the sample cell. So calibration of this system is extremely important, and it has to be done periodically. So this is what is shown here. You can see this. This is infrared source, one single source, and this is chopper. Chopper, what it does is it chops the lights. You know, sometimes the light is coming, sometimes the light is not coming. It's not continuous rays that are coming. Okay. So it is passing through the reference cell. So for example, 4.6, you know, it will pass without getting absorbed through the reference cell. Here in the sample there is some carbon monoxide present. So this energy, this length of this is showing the energy of that particular wavelength. So it will reduce, and this is the diaphragm detector signal, and detector signal has this diaphragm. So here all the energy is coming without getting attenuated. So here the pressure will increase on this side. Here the energy is being absorbed, so less energy will come. This is the optical window. So the light will get into this detector signal. This is the optical window for the other side. So here the pressure increase will be less, here the pressure increase will be more. So there will be deformation in the diaphragm, and this can be detected by control unit. Okay, so that is how basically the infrared analyzer works, NDI, non-dispersive infrared analyzer works. Okay. So these are other details, maybe you can look at it leisurely, but so this is requirement for the accurate measurements. Window need to be transparent to the infrared, so quartz and mica windows are used. There will be no fouling, no deposits, no soot on the windows. Fouling is caused by particulates, condensation of water vapors and hydrocarbons. Fouling can be minimized by heating the sample line and the analyzer, cooling or removing the condensate and warming the sample to the ambient temperature. So much of the what you call preconditioning of the exhaust gas is done to avoid the fouling of the windows. I am going to discuss with you the measurement of HC emissions, hydrocarbon emissions, using flame ionization detection, which we also called FID technique. Okay. So if you look at flame ionization detection, so FID is nothing but an instrument that measures concentration of organic species. Anything organic means anything that contains hydrogen as well as carbon. So we are interested in measuring the species as a sum. Okay. There may be hundreds and thousands of different types of hydrocarbon species that may be present. It may be saturated hydrocarbon, it may be unsaturated hydrocarbon, etc. So it is not possible for us to measure all of them. So what we do is, in order to make our life simple, we club everything together and we represent them as ppm of C1 or ppm of C3 or ppm of C6. So when we write the measurement values of hydrocarbons, we say 100 ppm equivalent of C1 or 600 ppm equivalent of C1, that will be equal to 200 ppm of equivalent of C3, and that will also be equal to 100 ppm of C6. Okay. So 600 of C1 is equal to 200 of C3 is equal to 100 ppm of C1. That is how we calculate. So normally whenever somebody says this many grams of hydrocarbons, and just if he says this many grams of ppm of hydrocarbons, that does not make any sense. It has to be reported along with equivalent of which one, C1, C3 or C6. These are the three options that we actually use. Okay. So for measurement, basically we are using flame ionization detection. So standalone FIDs are used for various applications such as landfill gas monitoring. You know, nowadays the cities emit a lot of solid waste. So what people do is they put the garbage into a landfill, and with time all that landfill starts emitting a lot of hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. So, it is a normal practice to see what kind of emissions are going into the environment, because ultimately these emissions are, some may be methane emissions, and which is not good. Methane is a very bad hydrocarbon gas, greenhouse gas. Okay. So, from emission point of view, it is very bad. So, therefore, methane emission from landfill is monitored. Then fugitive emissions which are emitted from power plants and also from engines while filling the car tank, there is a lot of emission, fugitive emissions, that also are measured using FID method. Other than that, straightforward IC engine tailpipe emissions are also measured using FID. Okay. So, just to put things in perspective in very simple terms, you see, just to put it very simply at a very high level, you have, this is called hot FID, hot flame ionization detection. So, what you do is you put a sample in, okay, in this red color, and there is a fuel gas, which is a hydrogen, or it could, normally it is either hydrogen, or sometimes we also use a mixture of hydrogen and helium, 40:60, 40 volume percent hydrogen, 60 volume percent helium, just to control its reactivity, because pure hydrogen is not a safe gas to handle. And then we put some kind of a air, and this is a coaxial burner. So, when all these things mix here, okay, and when all these things will mix here, what it will have? It will have fuels plus air, and fuel will be just hydrogen, no carbon there. The only carbon that will be coming into this flame, and then you lit the flame, the only carbon that will be coming into this flame will be from the exhaust gas sample. Okay. And what happens is that when you have a hydrogen oxygen flames, hydrogen plus oxygen is water. Do you generate any ions in there? There is no ion generation, but the moment you put in any kind of hydrocarbon through it, hydrogen plus carbon, you start generating ions, and those ions are, there is a, you apply very high voltage. So, those ions will start separating, this is anode, this is cathode. So, these ions will separate, and there will be some kind of a flow of current between these two high voltage electrodes. You measure that current, and then you can correlate it with what kind of HC is present in the exhaust. That is the simple method. I will come to the details of it, and then you allow the exhaust to go out. Okay. So, this is the basic principle of FID measurement technique. So, for measurement of hydrocarbons, FID, flame ionization detector, what it does is it ionizes the HC molecules and count the number of carbon atoms based on current produced in the process. So, we are basically measuring the current that is produced, and then we calculate the number of ions, and as I said, number of ions in C1 is 1, C3 is 3, and C6 is 6, and therefore, the volume that I showed you, 600 ppm of C1 is equivalent to 200 ppm of C3 and 100 ppm of C6. So, that is how it is represented, okay, because we are actually counting it carbon atoms, C1 atoms we are counting, and then whatever you like to present, you can present it the way, there are many options available. So, HC molecules are measured in ppm of C1 or ppm of number of carbon atoms that are present. So, if you look at the hardware of the flame ionization detector, so obviously it will contain a burner where you will lit hydrogen oxygen flame or hydrogen helium oxygen flame. Helium will obviously not participate in combustion, it will be only hydrogen and oxygen that will participate in the combustion. And when the burner will burn, obviously hydrogen and oxygen are not going to produce any ions whatsoever. Okay. And then the moment you put sample, it will generate ions, and for collecting those ions you need a ion collector assembly, and then this will be a very weak current, right. It will be few milliamperes or sometimes even microamperes, which is very difficult to measure. So, you need some kind of an amplifier which can amplify it to a measurable range, okay. And then you have electronics, and then you calibrate the instrument, and then you get the readings of what kind of hydrocarbons are present in your sample, okay. So, sample is mixed with hydrogen in the burner assembly and mixture is allowed to burn in the diffusion flames of hydrogen helium mixture and air. HC molecules get ionized since pure hydrogen in air does not ionize at all, it just produces water, no ions are produced. Ions are collected by the ion collector by the influence of applied electric field. So, you have to apply some high voltage and then these ions that are collected will form some kind of a current, and this small current is produced between these two collector plates. This current is amplified and output current becomes the measure of the hydrocarbon molecules that are present in the engine exhaust, right. So, usually as I said, you can use hydrogen, but it is better to use a mixture of hydrogen to helium, which is 40 to 60 by volume, okay. That is used as a fuel. Okay. So, if you have those of you who are going to use FID detector for hydrocarbon measurements, you have to make sure that you are using a calibration this fuel gas, which is 40-60 hydrogen helium mixture, and you also have to make sure that the flames are on. Okay. Sometimes you may be putting everything, but you forgot to ignite the burner. So, if you forgot to ignite the burner, obviously how you are going to generate the ions, okay, it will not work. Okay. So, then you have to calibrate it with propane and methane mixture. So, now you see you are putting some hydrocarbons and it is generating some current. How do you make sure that you know what kind of hydrocarbon concentration is there in your unknown sample? So, for that what you do is you already get calibration gas samples. Okay. Calibration gas samples means you get at least 2 or 3 different types of hydrocarbon mixtures. So, where basically you have either propane or hydrogen, propane mixture with methane, propane with nitrogen or methane with nitrogen mixture. So, say 500 ppm of propane or 1000 ppm of hydrogen or 6000 ppm of, so some known concentration of methane concentration, remaining nitrogen. So, this becomes your known sample. So, you have to first put it as a sample, and here you know the concentration, and then it will give you what kind of voltage it you generate. Then you put another sample and it will give you another voltage, and normally it is a linear curve. So, using these two, you can actually create a calibration curve between concentration and voltage, concentration on one axis and the voltage that you are getting on the another axis. Then you put your unknown sample, it will give you some voltage. Now, you go back to this calibration curve and you can then figure out what is the concentration of the hydrocarbons in the unknown samples. So, that is how the calibration process works. Okay. So, you are going to basically calibrate it with methane air mixtures, methane and or propane mixtures with the nitrogen. So, this is called calibration mixture. So, now for running a FID you will need at least 3 or 4 different types of mixture. One is the fuel air mixture, fuel mixture, which is what, helium and hydrogen, and then you will need at least 2 calibration gases of propane or methane, propane / methane mixed with nitrogen, right. These are the gases that will be required. Now, another thing is that I will tell you why we need to do this, but the samples are to be heated to a temperature of 191. So, as soon as the sample come out of the exhaust, sample will contain moisture, sample will contain hydrocarbon species, right, and if you allow them to cool, what will happen? Condensation will happen. So, if you delay, the condensation of some of the hydrocarbon species can happen, moisture can happen, and then the measurement may not be correct. So, what you need to do is you need to put a probe in the sampling pipe where it is hot, and then you bring it to the equipment, but then sometimes this pipe to bring to the equipment is about 5-6 meters long. So, if you take 5-6 meter long pipe and there is some small flow rate, obviously the sample will get cooled, and then its composition will change because the hydrocarbons will condense, water will condense, and that is not a very desirable thing. So, what you do is you put it through a heated pipe. As per standard, that heated pipe is maintained at 191 degree centigrade. So, there is a temperature controller, and around the pipe this is special material pipe, and then around that pipe there are heating coils. Everywhere 191 temperature is maintained all across the length. What that does is it does not allow the condensation of water, water remains in vapor form. It does not allow condensation of hydrocarbons. Okay. So, all the lighter hydrocarbons remain in vapor phase and it is brought, and it basically lighter and heavier hydrocarbons both remain in the vapor phase, and then you bring it to the sample to the detector, and there the measurement is done.